Welcome to the AirCon Vault, recordings of the live streams from Airwiggle's audio conference. These are made free thanks to our sponsors: A Sound Effect, Game Audio Learning, Kilohertz, Audio Kinetic, Sound Cuts, Sugi, Boom Library, Sound Warriors, and Airwiggles, the online home for audio people.
Today we will be talking about technical audio with some awesome sound designers, audio programmers, technical sound designers, and everything in between. I think all of your, or a lot of you people's roles are kind of like in multiple different, or span the spectrum, I should say. That's a better word. So, yeah, it's going to be great. We're going to hear a lot about all the different ways of working with technical audio. So, first off, quick introductions. I'm your host. My name is Greg Lester. You might have seen me around. And yes, Lewis, good question. This is airwiggles.shop. Get yourself some merch. Support the site. Support AirCon. Yeah. Jake, please tell us about yourself.
Hi, I'm Jake Basten. I'm currently working with Sound Cuts. I am a sound designer, composer, and programmer. So I kind of do creative sound design, implementation, and also tools programming for other sound designers to improve workflows and such things like that.
Nice. Oberon, how about yourself?
Hello, yes, I'm Oberon. I'm an audio programmer. I work at Shalfont Games at the moment, and my sort of day-to-day consists of anything from bug fixing, people saying, why isn't my sound playing, all the way through to algorithmic calculations for DSP effects within engines. So it's quite a broad spectrum of things I get up to, but as an overview, that's it.
Awesome. Jess, how about you?
Yeah, I'm Jess. I work for Blip Sounds, and I am a technical sound designer or hybrid sound designer or just sound designer, whatever you really want to call us. We generally we work in a way where we are like, if I'm assigned a project, I'm taking the lead and ownership of that project, where I am designing sounds, implementing them in middleware, going into the engine and doing whatever's necessary, making hooks to building entire systems. Full audio service here.
I love that term, hybrid sound designer. That's something I haven't heard yet, but I actually think that's a really good one. And I'm going to use that from now on. Right, so getting into the first question, what is technical audio? I think this is quite a broad and big term, and yeah, I'm very curious. Any of you who would like to try and answer that? Or attempt to?
Sure. Yeah, go ahead, Jess.
I would just say, in a general sense, I would say is once you start implementing sounds in any ways, whether that's in middleware or in engine, and start involving in programming, I would say you're on the technical side as far as sound design.
That makes sense.
I'd love to hear what you guys can add to that, but
yeah. So the way that we do it at Sound Cuts is we tend to track layers if we're doing it to a film, and then the technical part in my mind is where you've got your whole track lay and then you break it into a million pieces and then reassemble it in the game using systems.
How about on the more like going further down the spectrum into more game engine and all of that? What do you think about that, Oberon, from a more programmer standpoint?
Yeah, well, I was just going to add that I think that the nail has been hit on the head very much from where things get kicked off with in technical audio. In the implementation is quite an easy one to sort of think, right, that's putting the assets that all of you lovely sound designers have been creating. How do we get that to actually realize within the game engine itself? But then that extends all the way through to optimizing the systems which are triggering these sounds and responding to players' input, gameplay triggers, whatever it might be, and making sure that isn't using up too much memory, because unfortunately even the audio programmers have a very limited budget on what they're allowed to do within a title. So it can range from anything from implementation all the way down to, are we using the right file format for our particular product? I think that kind of covers it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it's interesting because there's like a whole spectrum, and each company as well has different roles and different definitions, and where something starts. Where does a technical sound designer start? Where does a audio programmer begin? And what are the responsibilities of a asset sound designer, or whatever you want to call a creative sound designer? That I'm not a fan of that term because it's all creative. But yeah, kind of going from that, what kind of skills in that case would you say to become I'm going to split this now, a technical sound designer, and then I want to ask as well for audio programmer, because I think we should make a distinction between those. And I'd love to, first off, skills for technical sound designer. Jake, what do you think about that?
Well, if you're really just starting off and looking at this from scratch, middleware is a great starting point. It provides a lot of tools straight out the box, which you just need to drop some assets in, and then you can have a play. Whereas, for example, if you're not using middleware, you would be far more reliant on a programmer, or you would have to do the audio programming work yourself to create the systems that things like Wise and Fmod have already created for you. So doing the Wise courses, which are free, and you can go on there, and the courses are great. You can go on there anytime and just learn that middleware. That would be a great starting point for you to learn some technical audio, and think about how you can put your assets together in a piecemeal way, so you can create some systems.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's an interesting point as well. So once you have middleware, you kind of take out a lot of the need for programming, especially for the basic stuff. How have you found that, Jess, as like a hybrid sound designer, in terms of working with middleware and potentially also not working with middleware?
So the majority of my projects, I have worked with middleware, both Fmod and Wise, but it does probably help me get started quicker. But then once I dive into Unreal or Unity, I am working off of those middleware functions, but building on top of that in code. And then to add to like starting to learn these things, I will recommend that once you go through like the tutorials that Wise or Fmod, what you can find for that, I would recommend like finding a sample project or something to actually like integrate it and start from scratch yourself, to see the connection there.
Yeah, learning by doing is also always excellent, and I also think like just starting to make your own games, just like something very small, not an open world RPG. Start small. I think that's also always a really, really great way to learn kind of like about technical audio, because you have to do some basic programming as well. Speaking
Absolutely.
about programming, going to Oberon, where do you think the technical sound designer ends and the programmer begins, with the caveat of it is different for each company?
Oh, you took out my answer there. It depends. Where does it end? I think so. Please, Jess and Jake, jump in if you think I'm going off course here. But for me, as an audio programmer, when I'm working with technical sound designers, soon as the sound designer is getting further and further away from the creative side of sound design, and I know that technical sound designers design systems, they help with implementation. There's lots of complicated and technical things that you do, which can sometimes rival that of some junior audio programmers. But my goal as an audio programmer is to keep you on the creative side, on that system side, getting things to work in gameplay, really trying to implement and portray that emotional response you're trying to get from the player as they're navigating this virtual world. If you're caught up too much with how does this file name integrate with the rest of the system? Have I got the right function calls going into whatever system? That is when the programmer should be stepping in and saying, let me take that off you so I can enable you to do the creative work that you are hopefully more skilled than I am to implement into the game. So it's a blurry line, but I think the audio programmers there, our customer is the technical sound designer and the sound designer. You are the people that we are trying to please the whole time, and then we're the mediator, the mitigation machine between the artistic sound side and the programmers who are like, why do we even need audio? So we've always got to negotiate that sort of middle ground. So I know that's a bit of a vague answer, but that's how I kind of picture it in my mind, especially when I'm working on a project with others.
Yeah, so where that out of the box, where those out of the box tools fail, that's when you need an audio programmer in general. Or if you find yourself coding a tool because the middleware doesn't provide it, you're now doing audio programming as opposed to technical sound design, is what I would say in general.
That's a great way to put it. I'm also curious then on the other side of the spectrum. So, because Jess mentioned at the start, of course, hybrid sound designer, which I love. As a term, I would probably consider myself that to a certain degree. Where would you say that kind of where would you say that technical audio begins in that case, Jess?
Like within my daily workflow?
So where if you're a traditional sound designer with no technical, where does it start to become hybrid?
So I would say when you get to the extent where you are working in code beyond the middleware, beyond the sound design, I would say once you start adding in a little bit of programming throughout your day, however minor, I feel like that's probably when you really start to get into that technical work. And the really like deep thought type things that Oberon said that you could hit the wall to where you're about ready to call for an audio programmer, like, somewhere in that window.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think it's definitely interesting because I've on a previous project I was collaborating a ton with my technical sound designer, and I guess for me it ended when so I was in Wise and in middleware, and then kind of we both met inside of the middleware, and then he continued more in game engine, and I stayed kind of in the middleware. So he implemented hooks and kind of liaised, I don't know, spoke to the programmers and the engineers essentially for further audio engineering help. And so that was kind of our distinction in that project. But I think as I said before, it depends on the company, it depends on the people, and also on like the size of the project, because in small companies, I think usually the audio programmer, unfortunately, is just one of the programmers who just is being thrown at it rather than someone dedicated who has a love and specific knowledge about it. So yeah, in that case, what does kind of like your day-to-day tasks look like? Jake, do you want to start with that?
Sure. So like I said, I do a mixture of things. So at the moment, I'm doing a lot of creative sound design, doing a lot of track laying, but I'm also doing all the implementation of those assets, much like what Jess said her workflow is. So in that situation, I'm actually thinking about my implementation while I'm designing, which is for me a much better workflow. I'll give you an example. If we have a lever pull and we want it to do a bunch of clicks, do I do a loop of clicks and just render a loop out, or do I render each individual click and then put it in a looping random container in Wise and introduce pitch randomness and volume randomness to make it more of a real-time system than just a static loop which just plays round and round and doesn't have any interest. So those are the types of things that I'm thinking about when I'm doing my creative sound design. to allow me to make those implementation decisions early. And then the other side of my work, which I haven't done too much recently, but we had a big narrative project, and one of the things that I created was a import tool for Wise, which used the WAPI, and we could just drag files in and it would put it in the right place in the Wise project, which saves us a bunch of time because we had a lot of iterations and we wouldn't have really been able to keep up with that game if we hadn't had that tool.
Yeah, that tool was very, very necessary. So I appreciate you saving me hours and hours and hours. How about you, Jess? What does your day today look like?
I would say similar to Jake's, where I do think a lot about how something's going to be implemented while designing it. Honestly, to the extent where a lot of times when I'm designing a sound, I might get a rough draft thrown out and then go ahead and work on implementing in the game and test it in the game, because we all know how things sound different once you get them in the game, even if there's no surprises within implementation. So once I get to the point finish where it's working properly, I turn around and do my revisions before I do any pushes. And so like I'll probably go through the whole process for like one feature before I move on to anything else.
That makes sense. Yeah. How about you, Oberon?
It's difficult to say what an average day is because it's always so varied. But usually it sort of starts with lots of bug fixing, lots of problem solving. You'll be surprised at how many times everything gets set up and you leave it all nicely, and then you turn up the next day and someone says, why isn't the music system playing? Or why is the music system now at 190 beats per minute rather than 85? What's going on? But it can, as I said before, it can range from many things. So a typical day is bug fixing, and then I'll be implementing maybe some tools, doing some tweaking, I think similar to probably some things that you do, Jake. And then I'll be working with the programming team to see what particular interactive hooks that we need, if there's any particular callbacks that we need to implement into the current stage of the project. And that can also sometimes delve out of the engine and specifically into things like VSTs and implementing particular DSP algorithms to create filters on the fly to help with sort of ambiances or occlusion, or sometimes something like I did the other little while ago was true peak detection. So I had to come up with an algorithm so that the sound designers had a quick way of analyzing their audio files to see what that maximum volume and peak was before they sent it off for further processing. So it's very difficult for me to say exactly what my day-to-day is, but that's kind of the rocky hill terrain that I tend to navigate day to day.
That does sound very varied, but it's cool because I think that fights mundane life, especially when you're sitting in front of the computer all day. So maybe having more things is a good thing, and a variety.
Definitely teaches you how to manage stress, that's for sure. No,
oh yeah.
it's all peaceful in the programming world. It's always peaceful.
Deep breaths.
Could you just do this small thing for me, please? That leads us on to the question: do I need to be able to code? I just want to start off with a quick view for myself. So I think personally that I am a sound designer. I am very much not a technical sound designer. I make assets, I make sounds, I mix, I do all of that stuff. I'm also in Wise, and I think that it's super necessary to be able to do middleware, but I don't code on a daily basis. In fact, I shouldn't be allowed to code at all. They shouldn't let me near the programming inside of the game engine because I will break stuff. However, I have at the start of my career and throughout engaged with kind of programming on a very basic level, and I personally think that even as a pleb sound designer like myself, you should totally look at the basics of programming, not learning how to really properly do it, but just what kind of basic logical steps are and things like integers, booleans, and stuff like that. Because I think being able to speak a teeny bit of the language and especially like recognize it is super duper helpful. However, we're not talking about the asset sound designers. We're talking about technical sound designers and audio programmers. And so as an audio programmer, obviously it's in the name, you need to code. So that's yes. As a technical sound designer, Jess, what do you think? Do you need to program?
I think, definitely basics. Definitely you need to be able to find your way around the code at the minimum, but you maybe don't necessarily need to have an in-depth understanding of programming since you're specifically focused on audio. I mean, you would need to worry about performance issues and things like that Oberon deals with. Like, you would want to be able to keep those things in mind. But I would say, well, personally, I don't have any, like, I didn't have any coding courses or things like that. I learned from trial and error, working in my own projects, making my own games kind of thing. And so I have worked in C++, C#, blueprints. I don't have like a thorough, fluent knowledge of any of those. It may be blueprints. I'm getting pretty good at blueprints, but yeah, I would say be able to understand how things work and at least be able to look at it and get an idea of what's going on at the minimum.
Yeah, that seems like a very good idea in that case. Jake,
I'm
what do you
going to
think?
jump in actually, if that's okay.
Go for it.
So I'm going to throw a curveball and say that you don't really need to know how to program to be an audio programmer. And yes, it is something that, if you want a job in industry and you want to have that title and the salary and everything else that goes with being an audio programmer, you're going to have to go kind of the CS route, learn some of those fundamentals, and be able to prove in an interview that you're more of a programmer than an audio person, which is sad. But it's the truth. If you look at Rockstar's recent advert for an audio tools programmer, they even said in the description, we prefer coding knowledge over any interest in audio, to that effect. They didn't really care that you were interested in audio or not. They want to know, can you deal with memory? Do you know what a pointer is? Can you do C++? If you're really interested in getting into those technical areas of getting things to synchronize properly, to trigger at the right time, to really play with the gameplay from a code perspective and an audio perspective, don't worry about the audio like programming language. Just get a tutorial, learn a bit of gameplay, and then just start trying to put things in that you find. Stop worrying about, do I know what this means? Do I know what that means? Do I have the background? It's one of my biggest regrets when coming into this is I put too much emphasis on being amazing at C++, knowing the language like the back of my hand, being able to do DSP mathematical calculations. Actually, my whole career to date would have served me better if I had done some gameplay programming, not really worrying too much about, do I know this and that, but just doing stuff and putting it in, getting it to play, getting it to break, having fun with it. And from there, just like any language, you'll get familiar with things. You'll go, oh, I recognize that. Oh, I recognize that. That looks very similar to this thing that I watched on YouTube the other day. Oh, that's a function. Oh, right. Okay, that's a function. Oh, right. Okay, going to blueprints. Right, that feeds this. And then suddenly you start building your own narrative around this sort of language that helps you do the thing that you're interested in. And suddenly you'll be doing audio programming. It'll just come naturally. So sorry about that mic drop. I know some people in the chat are going crazy, but I think there's so many audio people who are part of Air Wiggles. Obviously, it's an audio person conference, and I don't like the narrative that comes around at the moment that you have to be more of a CS person over an audio person. audio people can do it as well. I don't come from a CS background, and I was able to get to where I am today. Just play with sounds, and do it with all the wonderful tools that are out there for free. Anyway, sorry, Greg, back to you.
That was an awesome answer, to be honest, and I love that mic drop. I definitely think it's true. I feel that a lot of the time, especially with programming, it's such a daunting thing, and I think especially as like going into technical sound design or even normal sound design, a lot of the time people are like, oh, I need to learn blueprints in C# just to be able to put stuff in, and it's all so much. So it's really good to hear that. Do you have anything to add to that as well, Jake?
Well, just similar to what I said earlier, basically, I think as soon as you are making behaviors that are not out of the box, you can say that you are doing audio programming. So like Oberon said, don't worry about, are you doing it right? Should I be using a vector rather than an array? Like all of these like little computer science niggles, just get on. You need a collection of data, get a collection of data, throw it where you need it to go, and see if you can get a tool working, see if you can get the behavior that you want working. And that's the way to do it. You'll find that you'll pick up these basics of programming very quickly. Things like, you've heard scary terms like object-oriented processing and things like that. That is basically just a way of describing what you're building. It's not difficult. It's just there's a lot of that in programming. There's a lot of gatekeeping behind jargon, which makes it very difficult to approach. But actually, once you get past those, it's just a quite logical way to organize data. That's all it is. So yeah, completely agree with Oberon. Just get doing it if it's something that you want to do.
I would like to add to that and circle back around and mention that most everything I've learned in code is from like having the problem presented to me and just staring at it and working at it long enough that I figure it out, and knowing when to ask for help too. So, by no means do you have to know to start doing technical audio, but it's just, I guess I was meaning earlier that it was part of my day-to-day job, and probably not necessarily required for a job position listing, but it's something you will be put into very quickly as a technical sound designer.
That's awesome. And I also think in terms of what you said with asking for help, I feel that a lot of the time it's really, really tricky to ask for help, especially at the start, because you feel like you should know this. And I think once you kind of drop the thing of like, it is what it is, I'm just going to ask and see what happens, everything becomes easier. And I've asked programmers, technical sound designers, artists, so many different people in the dev team for help, and everyone's always been like, yeah, absolutely, because at the end of the day, we're a team that's working towards the same goal, which is to make an awesome game. And if you've got people that then say, no, then I think you might be on the wrong team.
And it's a big task. It takes more than one person. It involves more than one job. One person can't know all of that. And that's something that's a pitfall that I definitely fell into when I was starting out. I was like, oh my God, I need to be able to write music, implement music, learn middleware, learn C++, learn C#, learn all of these game engines, and be a great sound designer. I was like, no. Pick what you want to be, get good at that one thing, and you'll pick the other stuff up as you go.
I fell into that same cycle.
Yeah.
It also just sucks the joy out of it.
Sorry,
it also just sucks the joy out of it. I think that you suddenly think that you've got this list of things just to tick off and put on your CV, put on your LinkedIn. But I think we can all agree that we got into this for the enjoyment that we get from audio engineering in whatever form that takes, or design. And sometimes you can get so caught up, especially with the technical side of like, this thing isn't working, why is that giving me an error? It's not doing exactly what I want to do. And sometimes you've got to take a few steps back and go, I'm doing this because I love this. And if you're not loving it anymore, maybe you're doing too much or the wrong thing. So a bit of reflection never hurts anyone.
And I feel that anyone who is in a senior or lead or director position can definitely confirm that they still have to ask for help. They still don't know so many things, no matter where you're at in your career. There's always so much unknown, because also it's like if you switch from working on a racing game to all of a sudden on a super, I don't know, story-driven linear cinematic game or on a first-person shooter, you're going to have lessons that you can take from A to B, but so much of it is going to be like, oh, I have to relearn a bunch. And that's an awesome thing, in my opinion, in our industry. So we've done a bunch of the basics. We've had so many questions in the chat, so I'm going to start with chat questions now, because we're going to need some time to get through a bunch of these. So starting with Fernando Espinosa. Which books did you find useful and would recommend to read for beginners to learn scripting languages and logic? Any takers?
When I first started scripting, I did the School of Video Game Audio. That's kind of where I started off. I picked up C# in Unity to do that. That was with Leonard Poole, and that was great. And then actually while I was trying to get into audio, just went and got a job in the IT industry. That's where I got that's where I cut my teeth on programming, basically. So if you are thinking about it, it's a great side hustle. It pays well. But books, I don't think I had any books, actually. Not scripting ones, anyway. Game engine ones, the Richard Stevens and Dave Raybould Unreal book, the game audio implementation. That's a great one. I still use that to this day.
Yeah, I read that one as well. Oberon, you had some suggestions, right?
Yes. So, Principles of Game Audio and Sound Design by Jean-Luc Sinclair. Is that this one you were talking about, Jake? No. So that's even got a whole section on just doing basic sort of technical sound design scripting in C#, which is a really nice introductory language, step by step. Another one that I was trying to remember, but it kind of escapes me now, is Getting Started with Audio Programming in Fmod. I can't remember who it's by, but that literally takes you from let's download Fmod API, let's get that implemented into a game, and let's get that to play one sound. So both of those, for someone that doesn't come from a CS background, was a really nice introduction, and I recommend.
Yeah, that one, that's not Fmod Studio based at all, is it? That's literally just dealing with the API, which is really useful if you're working on a game that isn't using middleware, because that's a great introduction to those topics.
Awesome. We've got another one from Fernando. What is your preferred engine plus middleware plus scripting language combo for working games? What would you recommend to learn or specialize in the current state of the industry? Do you have any ideas for that, Jess, maybe?
I would say my favorite is definitely Unreal Blueprints. I really like Fmod, which I'm getting to know Wise a little more, but I really like Fmod, so I'm not sure yet on my favorite between those. But as far as recommendations, I would say like find what has the most resources for you to learn, which I think maybe would be Unity and Fmod, because actually Scott Game Sounds, I know he made a Unity Fmod course free recently, and I checked it out, and it's really good. So yeah, I think anything you can find the more resources for, because once you like get an idea of one game engine, one middleware, it's easily transferable, the knowledge. It's kind of just about finding your way around at that point afterwards.
Nice. Yeah. Any other opinions as well?
I will say, whoever your friends are, whoever your network is, learn what they use. And the reason being is if you've got friends that do game development and whatever it is, great. If your network does it or through a game jam, you've made some contacts, fantastic. Whoever that network is, learn what they are using. And the reason being is you're going to have questions and you're going to hit stumbling blocks. So when you hit those, who better to ask than everyone else that's your mates and your friends around you who are using it as well, who have maybe been through the same thing before? I think what both Jess and Jake have said, there's no real right or wrong way to go with engines or software. Like we're all exposed to so much with our different backgrounds. But if you've got a network which uses Unreal, just use Unreal, because you'll find it so much easier to chat with them, overcome problems, come up with project ideas. And as Jess, so rightly pointed out, when you get familiar with, it's all about familiarity, all of this stuff that we're talking about. When you start learning Portuguese, a different language, it all seems like mad language that you don't understand how you're going to learn. But through repetition and exposure to it, you start to piece things together. And once you've learned one language, Unreal, then suddenly you go, oh, look, Unity's slightly different, but it's not too dissimilar. There are lots of things that you can draw comparisons with. So I say work with your network, learn what they're learning, and then expand.
Yeah, that's completely. Because if you look at what Greg was saying earlier, when you're working with a studio or in a studio, you have your team. So you have people that you can go to. If you're new to technical audio, or if you're looking to get a job in this and you don't have people around you that can help you with that learning curve, it's a big hill to climb. So exactly what everyone said, find people that you can lean on who have got more experience than you. And I know, for example, Lewis Thompson and Greg are doing a lot of mentoring on this kind of stuff. So getting people with more experience than you to help you out is key.
Yeah, there's actually, thanks for the mention. There's a mentorship platform over at Game Audio Learning. I'll drop a link in the comments, and there are also some audio programmer and some technical sound designer folks in there. It will be updated soon with a better navigation and everything. But yeah, basically just find someone who suits you and get in contact with them. There have been a lot of people who have had mentorships through that. Right, we've got a question from Aaron Landgraf. Was there any specific hard skills or workflows that you thought you needed to know for this job that you actually didn't? Either it was someone else's responsibility or folks were willing to teach you on the fly. I think we answered that in part earlier, but yeah, any further thoughts with that?
So one thing that I always thought I would need to be able to do was DSP. And I was like obsessed with having to understand all this really complex maths. And I've done it once. in 5 years, I've done it once. So it wasn't, and so don't worry about it too much.
That makes sense, yeah. All right, in that case, Ollie Murray, how much scripting do you need to know in order to have a job in technical audio? Is it just enough to know how to set up systems in middleware, or do you need a certain amount of knowledge of code? Jess, I think I'm going to throw this question to you as the hybrid sound designer.
I feel like we've probably covered a lot of this, so I'm trying to figure out where to fill in. But I would say, I'd say you definitely want middleware to be your strongest skills for technical audio. And then try to learn as much as possible. Like, don't overwhelm yourself. Don't try to learn too much at one time. But like, once you're comfortable in the middleware and feel like you have a good, thorough understanding of that, then move on to trying to build on that with code and hooking sounds into games, and just grow from there. Like you can't learn too much. Like it will always be helpful. Like, as much as you can be helpful. Just don't do too much at one time. Take on like one task, one problem at a time.
That makes sense, yeah. Then a question from Daniel. I think we've kind of covered this as well, but potentially a little bit more. Where do you start for audio programming? Do I need deep knowledge of C+ or something? I'm a musician and technical engineer, but always managed to skip learning programming, but I would love to make my own VST. So what's a good, just general starting point for, oh my God, this is so much information. Where do I start?
So outside of the games industry is where you should start with something like this. The audio programmer literally has that's a YouTube website, and they do lots of tutorials and things. The audio programmer, I'll link to it if I can find it. They have just released a book called How to Get Started, or the Complete Beginner's Guide to Plugin Development. And that entire book assumes that you have no coding background, and they're literally going to do everything from a simple integer up to a ring buffer, and then put you into doing a sort of delay plugin in VST form. I haven't really come across anything much better than that to date. So if you do come from a musical background, making some sort of audio effect is a really good way to do it, because you know what the end product should sound like. So all of the steps and all of the things that you need to remember and try and get your head around, and doing lots of iterations and doing lots of mistakes and learning from these and building yourself back up and building up that thick iron skin that all programmers have, because they're entirely in fear that they're going to get things wrong all the time. All of that at the end of the book, and then you'll know that if it sounds right or not. So I really recommend that book. Apart from that, I would say just get experience doing gameplay programming. Do online tutorials through Unity. They have a really good course for a junior developer, as well as Unreal Epic Dev Community, I think it's called. The reason I say that is because audio programming touches so many parts within a game. So you'll be doing UI, you'll be doing music, you'll be doing sound effects, you'll be doing all sorts of things. If you can get familiar, again, using that word again, with these systems and how they're implemented, what they look like, the easier it's going to be for when you want to start doing your own audio programming. Yeah, I think that's probably the best advice I can give in a snapshot.
Fantastic.
I think it's kind of important to point out as well that VST development and DSP programming is an amazing skill to have, but if you are looking to be an audio programmer in games, it may not be a skill that you absolutely require. Like, a lot of the work that programmers do in games for audio in Engine is setting up hooks, memory management, bank loading, that kind of stuff, rather than real-time audio processing. Because we have a lot of our sound designers have a lot of that stuff in middleware. It's kind of an edge case generally that you would have to build a brand new effect that doesn't exist for a project that you're working on.
Yeah.
But what I'll add to that is that a lot of the fundamentals and the languages that you use in VST development are very translatable to what you do in games. So even though some of those core systems and end results are going to be vastly different, again, you're exposing yourself to the terminology and everything else that you're going to be doing going forward in your career. So, have that in mind when you're looking at resources like this. Is this giving me that exposure that I need to get to where I want to get to? And some of that's trial and error. You won't have all the answers. So get out and try.
Cool. We have another question. So we've got one from Fuvit Sangudom-Lert. I've butchered that. I'm very sorry. What would the workflow be like between technical sound design or an audio programmer and the dev team? I'll start with that. From a asset sound designer to a technical sound designer. So in my experience it's incredibly collaborative, where I will sit together with my technical sound designer when we're working on a new feature, and we'll discuss how we want this to sound and what then the implementation could be like and what the systems are needed. And then from there on, the technical sound designer might have to go off and do different things. And that's where I'm going to leave it to who wants to answer this one, from technical sound designer to the dev team.
I guess I will say that mostly once I try, in my particular situation, I try to bother the dev team as little as possible, because typically if they're hiring us, they, like just my team and specifically, they're looking to like not touch audio. They're kind of wanting that out of their hands. And so we do our best to make it where they wake up the next morning and there's audio in their game. But we do, of course, collaborate on like if there's any type of, stylistic requests they have, if there's any kind of, particular thing they want implement, or if we have questions once we get to that point, if we do need help or have questions, that's when we start reaching out to them. And so it's very like, actually probably very little other than like necessary communication between us, but not like so collaborative, I guess.
That's interesting. What have your experiences been, Jake?
So because Soundcuts is an outsourcer, we deal with a lot of different companies, often at once, and I think the main thing that we tend to do is try to slot into their workflow where we can. So if they have a method that they like to trigger audio events in a certain way, we just make sure that we conform to that. Or if they don't really have a system, we have a pretty tried and true workflow which we advise that they use because we know it's going to work. Sometimes they listen, sometimes they don't. But yeah, generally I would say a lot of our interaction is the programmer is over at the game studio, and so if we need any hooks, we would send just a list of hooks that we need them to set up for us, and we would be sort of in charge of, in middleware, we would say, okay, we're going to use an RTPC for this, we're going to use a state for this, we're going to put this in this sound bank, and we're very much in charge of that, and the programmer just helps us get it in the engine. That's kind of the way that we normally work.
Nice, yeah.
We do sometimes have like workflow requests, like Jake mentioned, and we do experience that type of thing, but that's usually something that's given to us at the very start.
How about you, Oberon?
Well, I think both Jess and Jake have painted such a good picture of how, like, when the audio program starts to get involved and what gets passed between teams. So I don't really have that much more to add, apart from, I guess, the audio programmer is just going to be one step closer to the rest of the programming team. So my communication is going to be slightly different. But as I mentioned earlier, the technical sound designers and the sound designers are my clients, so to speak. So I'm going to be getting a lot of input from them for what they need, what they're having problems with, and how I can adjust my workflow, things that have been pending for a while, and what I need to advocate for as well. That's something that which isn't talked about, I guess, enough, is that audio programmers also sometimes have to advocate for certain systems and designs that the design team want to implement into the game, such as synchronizing music. You'd never think you might have to fight for that, but actually sometimes when you want musical changes in the music system, that needs to be brought up by the audio programmer to say, actually, this is why we need it, because the gameplay programmers will say, well, the music changes from different states, why would we need anything else? I don't really have much more to add to it. I think both my fellow panelists have covered it excellently.
Then we'll continue with the next question from Aaron. What was your onboarding first weeks like for you in your current position?
Hellish.
Start off with that.
I'll quickly kick off. So my current position, onboarding, was pretty crazy. Wise wasn't working because someone who didn't know how to implement Wise pressed implement on the black box button, and then nothing worked. So I had to spend quite a long time trying to get that all reverted. But the place that I worked at before this, especially with programming, it's very much being thrown in the deep end. So I had to look at 1,500 lines of code and then decide how I'm going to start optimizing that and refactoring it without breaking the thing, which is always very scary. Yeah, so it's quite intense as an audio programmer, because I think I answered someone's question in the chat earlier that it's more recently that people from audio backgrounds have started becoming audio programmers. It used to be that someone in the engineering team, in the gameplay programming team, might get delegated the audio side of things. So with like the old guard still, in a lot of high up positions now in current studios, sometimes that when you come in, they're expecting a certain level of programming ability. And you who have just come fresh out of university or self-taught or whatever it is, you've suddenly got to live up to those unspoken expectations. So it can be pretty intense. And I think the best way to prepare for something like that, the way that I wish I'd prepared for more, is, as I mentioned earlier, playing more with things, just exposing myself to as many problems as I could as quickly as possible, and not putting my self-worth on whether or not I can fix those problems. It's putting my self-worth on, I approached that problem and I gave it a good go, and I've come away with an understanding. That's what the senior programmers wanted to see in me when I was a junior at the company. They wanted to know, do you recognize the problem? Do you have any idea about why that might have happened? No problem if not, but can you just sort of navigate around it slightly? So that's what I'd do differently if I was onboarding again.
That makes sense. How about for you, Jake? Any quick fire?
Yeah, my my first week at Soundcuts, so I was pretty well versed in Fmod, and I'd done quite a lot of coding in the Fmod API and stuff. But we pretty much use Wise here, and we were working on a big narrative game. And all I remember was, how do I do a looping random container? And it took me about an hour. And I was just looking around, wondering which checkbox to check in Wise. And I had a job at that point.
Yeah, I remember that project. I remember coming into it as well. I was like, oh yeah, make these sounds and do these things. And I was like, uh-oh. I was actually, funnily enough, it was obviously Allison was the talk before. So that was Allison, Jake, and then Ross, who did a talk on Monday as well. Myself and Lewis was on that a little bit as well. So it was good fun. Good fun. Lots of audio confessions. How about you, Jess?
I don't know that I could say I had any like official onboarding week. I actually started out with Ryan, who is our team lead, was like my mentor, because we've actually been long-term friends. And so once I started getting into sound design, I started, asking a lot of questions like, what do I need to do? And he would kind of give me assignments, and those assignments slowly turned into like, hey, I have extra work. I could really use your help on this. And once I did get started on Blip Sounds projects, I was also thrown in the deep end, but at least I did have lifeguards around in case I needed them. But it was very much just diving in and figuring it out and seeing how far I could get on my own. Back to figuring out when you need to ask questions too. But very like hands-on, just see what you can do. Onboarding.
Yeah, that's how it tends to be. Well, it depends on the company, I guess, as well. Robert Frost asks, when do you decide to make a tool versus when do you just recommend something like RX to a sound designer to detect true peak? Any takers?
Go on, Jake. You take this one.
If it exists, don't build it. Because building something from scratch is a big undertaking. Pipeline is a consideration if you need these things to be happening real time in engine, or if it completely depends on your requirements. But yeah, if there is an offline true peak detector like RX that will work for you, yeah, use it. If it won't work for you, you may have to think about building it. But that's also a business consideration, like especially at Soundcuts. Like I think there's two of us that are probably proficient programmers, and it's always a consideration of, this tool sounds great, but it's going to take 12 weeks, and that's not really what I've been hired for. Like, I'm a sound designer, so whilst it would be amazing to have this tool, is it actually going to make up for the 12 weeks where I am building it? So it's always that kind of trade-off consideration.
Which is, I guess, budget and time.
Yeah.
As a summary.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Question from Avishai. What knowledge do you feel is common knowledge that every tech sound designer is required to know, and what knowledge is more dependent on the studio company that you are working for, since every studio works a bit differently? Baseline knowledge for a technical sound designer. So I guess, what do we have? Who wants to take this one?
I would say that this is somewhat similar to something Oberon said, that it totally depends on the people that you are around and what your project requires, what, the company you work for. All of those things will kind of determine your base knowledge, because then you're going back into, like, which engine do I need to know? Do I need to know what middleware? All of that. It's really going to depend on the projects you're working on, in my opinion. But base knowledge, do your best to understand, middleware or implementation directly in the engine.
Yeah.
If you understand the overarching concepts, that's a great start. And then if you've got a project to work on, that's when you get into the nitty-gritty of, okay, how do I actually do this? I know what I want to do, but how do I actually do it?
I feel also that it's really important to just commit. So if you're not working on anything yet, a good idea is to figure out what direction do you want to go. If you're very, very, very general, AAA, more Unreal, Wise, Indie, more Unity, Fmod, doesn't mean it's one is not the other, and then just commit to one, and then once you know one game engine, you will be able to transfer tons of the knowledge to the other. Same with middleware. So yeah, committing and starting to learn is, I think, a really big thing. Jamie Lee asks, what led you to working full-time as a technical sound designer / audio programmer? Did you start right at the beginning of your career, or eventually moved into a more technical space? Oberon, do you want to start with that one?
Sure. So to try and cut a long story short, when I was at university and I was doing my sound design course, my lecturer pulled up Unity and started writing a quick script to get some of the sound effects to sync up with some animation. And I saw that and I went, that is magic, and I want to know how to cast magic. And then since then, I've been on a whole journey learning programming from scratch, learning DSP from scratch with no maths or science background. And I find that both music and sound design is quite sort of personal to me. So I still enjoy those things. But I'm really bad at receiving criticism on them. So I kind of refrained from that area of my skill set. Whereas programming and the technical side, I feel like that's a thing that needs a thing to be done. It's very logical based. So that I'm much better at dealing with as like a sort of job. And also the amount of magic that you can end up casting once you start to get a grapple of it, the way that you can start, I'm sure Jake and Jess can appreciate this as well, is when you start to get a grapple of like anything from the basic scripting, just to get like sort of sync thing that I mentioned earlier working, you suddenly have this like epiphany moment of going, what else can I do in this virtual world? So that's why I chase what I'm chasing and how I got into it. But yeah, should I pass over to Jess?
Yeah.
So I actually went to college for recording arts with the intention of producing music, but we did have a couple of interactive audio courses. I did have a lot of game development friends. And so at that point, you know, my focus was music, but I was like, hey, this stuff is really cool and seems really fun. And so years later, when I start realizing I want to get into sound design, I'm like, okay, I have the audio basis. And I just dove into like, okay, I'm going to learn middleware, learn engines from the people I talked to. A lot of people suggested that. So once I started doing that, this is kind of a confession thing. Like, I realized if I had to choose a position, if I had to choose sound design over, or if I had to choose like the technical side versus creative side, I decided I'd prefer the technical side. So that's where I started labeling myself that on social medias while looking for jobs. And then it did kind of work out for me that I was able to do this hybrid position, and I really enjoy it. But that was kind of my journey. Like, as soon as I got into sound design, I did dive into the technical side.
Very nice. Jake?
Yeah, so I come from a musical background. I did a useless classical music degree and came out, which asked me anything about 18th century opera. But after that, I was just kind of looking around, and as you've heard, I kind of do a bit of everything, and I still haven't really settled on one thing. So bit of sound design, bit of music, bit of implementation, bit of coding, and it's taken me quite a long time to raise all four of those skill sets to a competent level. I always tell people that are looking to get into this, don't be like me.
Some excellent advice. Actually, that leads us to reels and how to actually get a job. There's been a number of questions on this, and it's something that I wanted to get to sooner and totally forgot. So let's get into it now. When we're applying to technical sound designer positions, we need to meet certain skills. And once we've met those, cool, that's great. But how do we show the employer that we can do that? What type of reels or portfolios do we need, and how can we like best present that? What has been your like learnings and strategies for that, for both technical and an audio programmer as well? So anyone want to start off with that? Technical sound designer reel.
Just definitely my personal, sorry.
Go ahead.
Just my personal opinion. I don't have a technical sound design reel, but from the ones I've watched and stuff, I think you could follow some rules of a normal sound design reel where you do want to keep it short and sweet. Like, you want to show, I would start with showing what the system you built sounds like, and then give a brief description and show what you did without having to go too much in depth. Like, you don't have to show creating events and whys or whatever, like things that are expected of you to, as that position. Like, usually the person that's hiring you, they're going to know how those things work and be able to fill in the blanks, just in my opinion. So I would keep it short and sweet and just show off your cool stuff.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah, bottom line is it's got to sound good. So like the trick to technical audio is, as I said at the beginning, getting your track lay that sounds great linearly into middleware or whatever end thing that you're implementing with, and having it sound as good as the linear track lay. That's the really tricky part, because you often find that implementation, you sometimes lose the cohesion that you had. Putting that in a technical reel is tricky. It's definitely harder than doing just a creative sound design reel, because you do need to show decent sound design, but you also need to show innovative implementation techniques. And I think it really comes down to video editing. A huge amount is what shots are you going to show when, and how are you going to get that balance between, I made this cool sound and then I got it in working in this way, and it needs to be snappy, like Jess said. So there is an awful lot to think about when you're doing a technical reel. I'm not sure that I've cracked it, to be honest. It's there are some people that I've seen on YouTube that have done it very well, and the names escape me, so I'll try and find them and put it up afterwards.
I think there's a bunch of School of Video Game audio reels as well, and a lot of those are really good. From what I've seen as well, I think especially if you're being hired solely as like an implementer and technical audio person, you can always collaborate with someone with the sounds, I would say, and then focus more on the technical so that you can ensure that it sounds really good on the source level, and then you focus on the more interesting parts. And I think what Jess said earlier is really important as well in terms of don't go too basic. I think at some point I've seen people implement things that are very interesting, like sound propagation after like explosions, so that you have like a built-in delay depending on distance, and all kinds of interesting stuff like moving through bushes and shrubs that like then play sounds based on how fast you move through them. So I think going for more interesting things rather than just here's how the footsteps switch based on the surface is going to get you way further, because those are kind of the basic things that people will expect you to know anyway, and doing more interesting, innovative things, as Jake said, and Jess as well, will get you a lot further, because then employers can see, oh, cool, that person is also thinking and being creative and not just following the instructions of the YouTube video. So yeah, and it's also fun, right? You should just have fun with it. So what are we thinking about the audio programmer, Oberon?
Yeah, it's a difficult one. I think my crash course in how to do a more audio programming focused reel and how to get across all of these things that everyone's touching upon is to do a short video, if you can, of whatever systems it is, hopefully in a game that adds a nice visual context to whatever demo project it is, but do two things that prove your skills. So one could be wise implementation, that's all hooked up and some basic stuff's doing. Another one could be, I don't know, some sort of audio tool. And then do a third thing that's completely off the wall and crazy that grabs the attention of anyone who's looking at it. The way that I would then structure it in a video is then within the sort of tagline that you'd have at the bottom of each little video, say, look in description for the GitHub link, so that whoever's looking at it can straight away go, right, there's the code. If they don't want to see too much of the visual stuff and they want to see, does this person know basic object-oriented programming, C++, Sharp, whatever it is. And the final thing I would say is sort of done is better than perfect. Just do it. Just get one together. Even if you're not a professional video editor, just get something together and give it to your network, give it to people on AirWiggles, whoever. Someone famously once said, once you've turned up to that interview, that job that you think this is going to change my life and everything's riding on this one moment, this one reel, once you've had that 10 times, you're just getting started. So you might as well start now and start getting your reel out there. So that's what I have to say.
Nice. That's excellent. Right, we'll do one last question. I'm sorry, there's so many more. You have been absolutely awesome, chat, asking so many amazing questions, so I'm really sorry for not getting to all of them. However, if some of the panelists want to hang around afterwards, we've got the Hangout space, and you can ask some further questions in there that yeah, if the panelists have time, we'll answer for you. And I'm trying to type Hangout and I can't. There we go. There it is. This is the one. So yeah, head over there afterwards. So final question. What are we gonna pick here? This is an interesting one. So what is your usual approach to optimization, bank management, and so on? So basic optimization, how do you approach that? I'll shoot it over to you first, Jake.
So hugely dependent on the device that you are shipping to, really, on how many banks you have. For example, can the endpoint deal with multi-threading? That's a huge thing to think about. How many banks do you want loaded at once? Do you just want one big global one? Is the game small enough to just bung it all in one bank? Or does it need to be way more fragmented and bitty? And then there's also, I'm referencing Wise a lot, but there's also, you also need to think about quality. And do we need really super high fidelity, or can we get away with worse quality and save some memory? So there's a lot to think about for sure, and it's all to do with that endpoint, and you can definitely ship different versions of your sounds according to different shipped platforms. Does that answer it? I think I've forgotten the question.
No, that was great. Jess, similar to that. So any further things to add?
I don't think I actually have anything to add to what Jake said.
Cool.
That pretty much covers it.
Oberon.
I think Jake did such an excellent job of just giving an overview of everything there. There isn't, you could get caught up in the details and the weeds and everything, but I think that was such a concise overview. The only thing I'd add on top of that is what we've all been saying throughout: communicate to the other people in your team, because they're going to be able to tell you what levers need pulling and pushing, what needs optimizing, what doesn't. If it's not broke, maybe don't worry about it. Maybe I shouldn't be saying that as the audio programmer, but that's how I tend to leave Zoom calls. Thumbs up going, I'll see you tomorrow.
I do think that's great advice. I think Alex Jones touched on something similar, where it's like, especially if it's kind of different, of course, if you're working on like a Call of Duty franchise or something like that, but especially when you're working in indie games or something, I think a lot of the time it's just get it to work. And if it's not totally, if the FPS is good, then we leave it. We don't have to worry too much about it. So yeah, with that, thank you so much, Jake, Jess, and Oberon, for your knowledge and advice. And and thank you to all of you for posting so many awesome questions in the chat. I'm sorry we couldn't get around to all of them, but like I said, come to the Hangout space afterwards and continue asking. And I hope you've enjoyed AirCon so far. We have another talk coming up very soon with Adele, talking, she's, I believe, in the panel with a couple of others talking about voice acting. So yeah, definitely head over to that. And yeah, thank you so much. Have an awesome rest of AirCon, and thank you to you all.
Thank you. I'm sorry I won't be in the Hangout space, but if anybody wants to send me a DM on Airwiggles, feel free. Always happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. In that case, goodbye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
See you later.